Everybody's going to get slobber all over these. Oops. I just just noticed this meeting is live streamed, so be careful what I just said. Our parking tickets, for those of you who found the parking area, gave us tickets, bring them here and they'll be validated. I didn't bring mine with me. I left it in the car, but anyway, leave them with the LSO. Was there anything else, Heather? There's Senator, welcome. Well, I think that's about it. So we are ready for you, Colonel, to get going anytime you're ready.
Chairman and folks, one housekeeping thing. To the microphones, please.
Yeah, we can't hear you either, Heather. You will about be touching this thing before it picks you up.
I'm here.
Yeah.
So eat the microphone is what you're telling me. All right, Mr. Chairman, I am Colonel, a military attorney for the Wyoming Military. I wanted to send the regrets. Got called to the governor's office to talk budget stuff. I'll let you all talk to him about more important money or y'all, but we think you are all very important. This morning, we have a fairly light agenda. I will begin with an update on the department really concentrating on deployments. Then, not on the agenda, you'll have a handout that I'll go through, which is a slideshow that talks a little bit about who the Guard is with regard to the active duty, as well as a 4-page glossary of terms. Senator Hutchings asked that we consider that to educate y'all and so you have something that you can put in your binder that may help, since we're fairly acronym heavy in the military. And over the years, we've probably thrown a lot of terminology at you. So we're really I'll go through that after I do the deployments, and then we'll move on with the agenda, if that's all right with you, Mr. Chairman. So turning to the military update, this is should be slide 3, I believe. And this is really a map of the current Wyoming Army National Guard deployments. And you see, we currently have troops in 4 places. Exactly where they are, how many people for operational security purposes, but you can see starting on the left, we have Charlie Company, Kosovo, up there above Greece, and then the remaining are field artillery folks, and they are around Southeast Asia in the Central Command area. The 2nd to 300th being in Kuwait, the 115th Field Artillery in UAE, United Arab Emirates, and then various other pieces are in Afghanistan. So any questions about where your Army National Guard folks are? I think we've previously told you there are approximately 370 people. I just won't tell you who is in terms of numbers. Turning to the next slide, you can see we do have some Wyoming Air National Guard deployments, 7, and you can see they're all over the world as well. Starting on the left there is one in the CONUS. That's part of our Aeromedical Evacuation Squadron, and they're working out of Andrews on the East Coast. I can tell you that because it's in the CONUS. It's in the United States. And they're part of that patient bridge as we pull wounded people out of the Southeast Asia area. They typically go to Germany first, then go to the East Coast, and then are treated there and go home from there. The second is we do have 2 folks in AFRICOM in Africa doing some logistical support things. We have 2 in EUCOM, which is Europe, and then we have 5 in CENTCOM. The Air National Guard, beginning in March, will 5 people in various specialties, mostly to what's labeled on here, the CENTCOM area. Right now, we're really low on our deployments, but at the beginning of the year, we'll start throwing people out the door again. The difference between the Army Guard and the Air Guard is the Air Guard typically up to 180-day deployments, often only 90 days. Army Guard usually goes for Army Guard's last major deployment 9, so it's been several years. The Air Guard pretty much has people out the door any given or shorter duration. Any questions of your National Guard?
Doesn't look like it.
All right. From there, I'm going to move to the other presentation, which you have in front of you loose. It's not in your binders. And this really was our attempt to answer some of the questions about who is the National Guard, what is it we do, what are we about. So the second slide is a constitutional basis for the Wyoming National Guard. And you'll see the two U.S. Constitution provisions that were in Article 1, one of the original parts of the Constitution, allowing there to be a state militia. This is where we go all the way back to the 1600s. Each state had a militia. And when the United States was formed and the Constitution passed, it was codified in Article 1, Section 8. Article 2, Section 2 there, before you get to the Wyoming Constitution, this is where the president has the right to call into active service the militia, which in 1903 became what was then the Guard, a national militia, essentially. And then you can see the Wyoming Constitution provision ratified in 1889. The Wyoming National Guard, the territorial governor in General Order 1 in 1870 actually started what became the National Guard, started a state militia. And so you can see the reference there. So these two provisions, if anybody asks you why the Guard exists, it's in law, as old as the U.S. Constitution. Any questions about that? I promised General Porter I wouldn't get too lawyery on you, so if you have questions, I'll be glad to answer as in much depth as you want. On the next slide, we talk about the National Guard overview. We often talk about the 54, and that always confuses folks, or sometimes does, because there's only 50 states, but we actually have Guard units in all 50 states, as well as the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. That's why you get 54. And we are the combat reserve of the Army and the Air Force. The National Guard is only Army and Air Force. There are no Navy components of the National Guard. There's the Coast Guard in the United States, which is why you don't have a Navy Guard. Some states have naval elements, but they're not considered part of the National Guard. They're usually a state guard peculiar to that state. We often talk about National Guard Bureau, led by a 4-star general who is now a member of the Joint Chief of Staff. That changed just a few years ago. Really oversees resources and federal money plus policies for the 54 states and territories. They also are a clearinghouse for federal mission taskings. And you can see down there in the middle, the president through the Secretary of Defense says, hey, we want to send troops to X. They then typically go to the active duty. The active duty decides if they can handle the tasking. And if not, they go to the reserves and the Guard and say, we need help in these areas. Very important, as we talk about a lot on the Air Guard side, over 80% of the tankers are in the Guard. Over 70% of the tactical airlift, I believe the number is, are in the Guard. So the active duty needs us. And then you can see the governor of Wyoming is the Wyoming National Guard's commander-in-chief. And he does, by statute, have the right to call members to state active duty through the adjutant general to both meet Wyoming emergencies as well as a request from another state. And that's an EMAC, an emergency management compact that is in our statute. We passed it many years ago. All 50 states have an EMAC, and it essentially is a framework for one state to ask the other state for help. Doesn't have to be the Guard. Typically, it's the Guard. So if, say, Colorado needed forestry service help, some kind of specialist in Wyoming had it, you could actually send a Wyoming state employee to Colorado under an EMAC. Typically, it's a Guard, though. Typically, they're asking for firefighting or flood relief, those kind of things. Any questions about that? And we'll talk some more about that a little bit. But
Yeah, and Committee, anytime you have a question, just flag me down if I'm not watching.
Thank
Oh, Senator Hutchins. Yeah, I get close. Yeah, I get close to it.
Colonel Smith, did you say with the EMAC that the state has to request members from another state? We don't, in our state, just send people to help. They have to be requested.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hutchings, I'm trying to figure out, we can put people on orders, a couple of people, and send them down to Colorado for an exercise or for a minor thing. But if you're going to ask for a large number of people who are going to be accomplishing the host state's tasks, typically we use EMAC because the they're on a guard. We just had a big conference down in Denver, the National Guard Association meeting, and we use that as an opportunity for a big exercise. And so we so for training purposes, we often send people. Onesie twosies, we can send people, like I've been to another state to conduct an investigation on military orders. But for a state emergency in that gaining state, we EMAC, because one of the things that's important from the lawyer's point of view about EMAC is it provides immunities. They then get all of the immunities of the host state. So if you're guarding critical infrastructure during a terrorist event, for example, like the Boston Marathon bombing, we sent a bunch of armed, not we, Wyoming, some other states sent a bunch of armed people into Massachusetts. You do an EMAC because that gives them all of the protections from liability of the Massachusetts National Guard. So that's why you do these compacts.
Mr. Chairman.
One further question, Mr. Chairman. So that's where we come in with the TDYs, the temporary duty assignments, which is kind of neat to have this little list of acronyms. So when you're talking, people understand that this is a temporary duty that they're performing. And then when you send them, but when the EMAC comes into place, again, it's the receiving unit saying, hey, we need you so badly. You're going to come and we're going to kind of take care of you as if you belong to our state. Is that a layman's kind of term way of saying it?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hutchings, yes, TDY is a really broad term. So if you're assigned to Casper in the Army Guard and we send you anywhere within the United States that's not a deployment, we call it a TDY. It's a temporary duty somewhere else. You're not being reassigned. You're not going away permanently. So TDY is a really broad term. An EMAC response would be a subset, a part of the broad TDY circle.
Senator Pappas.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And under the EMAC, and Colonel Smith, correct me if I'm wrong, but the receiving state has to reimburse the state that's sending their troops to assist. So it's not like you requested and it's a freebie. The receiving state does have to pay for those services, if I'm not mistaken.
Mr. Chairman, that's right. That's the sending state. Two things we worry about is somebody else is going to ultimately pay for it, and they're protected from a liability point of view. All right.
Okay.
We'll go on to the next slide. This one is as simplified as I can get it. This is an attempt to try to explain the difference between active duty troops, which we call on Title 10. This is the Army, the Navy, the Marines, the Air Force, versus the National Guard. We always say two. Title 10 refers to the United States Code that talks about So you can see here from a command point of view, active duty is the president through the service secretaries. The pay is federal. The National Guard, it's through the governor. Almost everything we do in a 32 status of governor is the commander-in-chief. Interestingly, though, when you're in uniform, unless it's state active duty, the pay is still federal. That's what makes the Guard such a great benefit to the state. Because when we're in uniform doing training within the state in particular, unless we're responding to a Wyoming or EMAX state active duty, we're paid by the federal government, of the military department. And you can see it goes. So, in duty assignments, this goes to the whole PCS thing. If you remember when we were talking about spouse, over the years, has been very generous in looking at how military. About military spouses don't have any choice but to follow their active duty spouse, since that's the only base permanent installation we have in Wyoming. And they're ordered from the federal command. They go worldwide. You do have a choice. You'll have an enlisted years to go, you're going to go. You have no choice. On the Guard side, it's almost so you're assigned to the Army Guard again in Casper, and a job comes open that you might have a promotion opportunity or an advancement opportunity, or you just want to move, say in Cheyenne. You would apply for that, and if selected, you would then move within the state of Wyoming. We can't assign anyone outside the state of Wyoming because we're the Wyoming National Guard. Now, people do leave for other Guard jobs around the country, full-time, different benefits, an opportunity to get promoted. So that does happen, but we don't make them do that. Now, rarely, National Guard can do essentially a management-directed reassignment. We really try not to without a lot of communication unless it's really necessary to meet mission, because as you can imagine, it tends to affect morale. If you live in Casper and I make you go to Rock Springs, you may not be very happy with me. So we tend to talk it out and try to make it as voluntary. And that goes to the next row, which is choice to move. And so on active duty, often you will have a few options on location and duty. That's where you get that permanent change. So, for example, when I was in Europe on active duty, I had come into the Air Force from Colorado, where I went to law. And I said, hey, I'd like to get back to Colorado or the Rocky Mountains. I have Wyoming, but ended up in Wyoming. In the Guard, you really move to accept a new position or you choose to leave. And this is just the difference. The length in place, 2 to 4 years at FE. Some of the specialties involving the missile business can stay longer. For most people, 4 years gone, as we talked a little bit when we were talking military. In the National Guard, I know people who are never 30, 40. So deployments, you're ordered to deploy by your command chain. When you're on active duty, they just tell you volunteer. You know, the old voluntold jokes about the military. In the National Guard, you're ordered in typically the way we deploy, the governor actually has to consent. There's a couple of federal law that allows the command to just grab a certain number of people for a shorter duration and tell them to go, whether the governor consents or not, but it's very rarely used. And I have a whole paper I can send anybody who's really interested on all the different ways you can be activated to Title 10. There's like 7 different ways. The most common is we get a tasking down, they want these things or these units, and we then agree we can fill it. And often we'll ask for volunteers in the Air Guard in particular, will have these specialties that we need to send people, and almost always we fill that requirement through volunteers. On the Army Guard, they tend to go as units, but rarely does the entire unit go. So often, again, we have some more volunteerism than the active duty. And finally, just in terms of location, obviously you all have heard of F.E. Warren Air Force Base in Cheyenne, the only active duty base of any branch in Wyoming. There are a few there's ROTC folks at UW that are technically on active duty. And there also are a couple of recruiters around the state that are also on active duty from all the branches. For the National Guard, the Army Guard is in 15 communities, and I have a map I'll show you've seen before. The Air Guard is only in Cheyenne. Any questions about all that?
I'd have one, still not close enough. So if they're looking toward deployment, if they're ordered to deploy, their job is protected. If they volunteer, is their job protected, or is that prerogative of the?
Mr. Chairman, what you're talking about is the USERRA set of federal laws, as well as the Wyoming, again, this legislature has been very proactive. We have extremely strong protections. USERRA covers all federal deployments for all Wyoming military members in the Guard. The state law also covers those, as well as state active duty. So under USERRA, if you're going to go on a federal deployment, it does not matter how you go. You are still protected under USERRA. Sometimes the orders will say voluntary, but they're not really, because we have told them to fill this slot. The difference is if the entire Air Guard, for example, was ordered to deploy to, say, go to Japan or go to Korea, that would be not voluntary. If you just have certain taskings, like we need 5 AirVac nurses and med techs to go to Germany for patient hauling, it's considered voluntary, but it's not for USERRA law purposes. So when they leave their civilian employment, they're protected by federal law.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Representative Blake.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colonel Smith, I just have a question on how do the guards persons get paid? So do they get so much a month for being in the National Guard? Do they get extra for their weekend every month? Do they get extra for their 2 weeks in Guernsey? And then do they get paid extra if they're filling sandbags at a river? Could you just briefly explain that for me, please?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman and Representative Blake. And I have another slide coming up that will talk about the different statuses. Most Guard members, the 1 week in a month, 2 weeks a year, they only get paid when they're in a duty status. So if they come to drill weekend, after drill weekend, depending on how long they were there, they will get a federal paycheck. If they go to AT, annual training, at Camp Guernsey for 2 weeks to shoot rockets, they will get a federal paycheck for 2 weeks of duty, the same as every active duty person at the same rank and years of service. It's all based on rank and years of service. That's for the drill status guardsman, which I'll talk about in a minute. That's the part-timer that so many people, that's the bulk of our force. I'll talk in a little while, if I may, about some of the other statuses. When they go on state active duty, whether here in Wyoming or an EMAC response to a different state, they are paid by the state. The state cuts them a check. And it is at the same pay level, again, by our statute, they get paid the same as if they're on federal duty. So again, it's the same pay table, but the check comes from the state. The other interesting thing about state active duty is they fall under the workers' comp system. If they're on military duty, they fall under the VA system if they have a duty-related illness. They break their leg while on duty, they're paid for by the federal government military system. If they break their leg on state active duty, it's workers' comp. So it's very different.
Okay, Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I know what you say there's only one Air National Guard location is Cheyenne. Is there any chance, or is there something stopping us from having another location, say at the largest airport in Wyoming?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Anderson, funny you should mention that. We have talked for years second location. It's the airport. And there is this long history of aviation at Casper during World War II, which you all are going to see during the tour. I've been on the tour, and it's great stuff. Problem is, as involving the federal government, is you can't relocate without federal authority and money. So they would have to give us money to build these and relocate. We would have to get a mission tied to this location. So I think I can speak for the Wyoming Air National Guard as well as the Wyoming Military Department. General Porter can correct me down the road. I think we would love to be in a place like Casper, but given federal spending limits and where we are in the Air Guard,
Senator Pappas.
Mr. Chairman, I had a question earlier, but just since we're talking that topic, another issue too that's really problematic is, should we get another mission, and should the government, the federal government, assign Casper that location of that mission and provide facilities? Manning is a really difficult thing in Wyoming. Even the Air Guard in Cheyenne has never been to its 100%. I don't know if it's ever been, but it's always in the 90s, right? Somewhere in there.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Pappas, that is in the Army Guard, strength, manning, how well you're doing on fulfilling your existing missions has been a critical component for years. In the Air Guard, the last several years, with all the budget constraints the DoD's been under, with sequestration, some of the other things going on at the national level, its strength on the Air Guard side has become critical as well. We're currently at 90.55, if I remember the last number, in the Air Guard in terms of 90.5% of our manning goal. The Army Guard's slightly better, I think, at 94. They are now nationally looking at that when they try to decide to do a new mission. There's a lot of cyber, remotely piloted vehicles. There's a lot of stuff going on at the national level. And one of the problems we have is Wyoming National Guard as a whole is in the bottom 10 in terms of strength. Back in 2002, we were about 85%. We're now at about not quite 91%. So I am, in the 17 years I've been in the Air Guard, I don't think we've ever been at 100%. That is our number one priority. It has been our number one priority. General Porter has really been pushing for us to do everything we can, talk to everybody we meet about the wonderful benefits of being in the Guard. Great way to pay for your college education in the Wyoming school system. Because we can't have full strength. So I would ask all of you, anybody who's struggling or wants to serve their state and country,
Chairman.
Yes.
And I had another
Senator,
topic,
go ahead.
but based on that, there's actually a new program coming into effect. And I think we're a trial state, correct? There's going to be $4,500 per year, per semester, per year, I think, for members of the Air National Guard. I think there's 10 states that are doing this pilot program. So, hopefully our folks will take advantage of that, and hopefully there'll be a good recruiting tool as well.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Pappas, to follow up on that, that's federal tuition assistance, which has never been available to the Guard until now. We are one of the pilot states. We actually get a federal technician, which I'll talk about in a minute. We actually get an employee to manage the program. The great thing about it is it's in addition to the current tuition assistance program. And unlike the current tuition assistance program, which is geared towards the 7 schools of higher education in Wyoming, federal tuition assistance you can use anywhere. In the Air Guard, we pull people from 22 different states who want to come fly C-130s or do some of the missions we have. So having a tuition assistance that can be used outside of the state of Wyoming is beneficial. And we are target or an experiment, so to speak, and it's funded only for the next 2 years, and hopefully that'll help us in our recruiting.
Mr. Chairman, now back to my original question. It was about salaries. Colonel Smith mentioned that when you're working in the state and you get paid by the state, the federal your state salary is the same as whatever the federal salary is. There is one exception, maybe more than one, but just so that you'll know that the tag himself only gets paid as a colonel, as an 06, and he's never when he's not in federal status. If he's in federal status, he can be paid as a 2-star general. Unfortunately, I actually, before I even got into the legislature, and just after I retired from the Guard, I had asked somebody, I think it was Pete Illoway, to run a bill to change that, and it was unsuccessful. So to change, because I thought that, the pay ought to be commensurate to the rank, but that didn't happen.
Maybe it's a bill we should revisit at some point, probably too late this session, I would guess. But Senator Anderson, can you remember what you wanted?
Mr. Chairman, yes, I remember well.
Right.
I know you're short on pilots for the Air National Guard and other positions, and we have a lot of them here in Casper that really want to live in Casper and be in the Air National Guard if they could get it done. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Anderson, I'll take that under advisement. I'll be sure to share that.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
They can still live in Casper and fly out of Cheyenne.
It's a short commute.
That happened. I beg to differ. If you want to belong to the Guard, I had a gentleman who was when I was the director of staff at the Guard. I had the director of operations, who was a pilot for Continental Micronesia. Bunch. I don't know if you remember, but anyhow, he used to fly from Guam every drill to drill in Cheyenne.
Wow.
And Mr. Chairman, Senator Pappas and Senator Anderson, we actually do have people who fly their private planes into Cheyenne for drill. If you're a pilot, you do weird things. I don't know. Mr. Chairman, we've gone far afield.
Yeah.
We can go to the next slide if that's all right.
All right. Proceed.
So this is my attempt to try to kind of show where the Guard fits in. One of the confusing things about the National Guard is we are considered a reserve component, but there is also a reserve. So we have 3 main components. There's active duty, the folks that get bossed around. That's Army, Navy, Marines, and Air Force. National Guard, as I said earlier, is only Army and Air. And then we actually do have the reserves. The National Guard is a reserve of the military, but there's also something called the reserves, just to confuse the crud out of everybody. And I'll show you in a map in a minute. Wyoming actually has 3 reserve units for various other components, 2 Army, 1 Navy. But you can see the numbers presently, and these numbers are very rounded. Depends on the account, what day it is, depends on what political issue they're talking about in terms of what they end up naming. But currently, as of 2018, we have 1.28 million people in uniform on active duty. Not quite 450,000 in the Army and the Air National Guard in the 54 states and territories. The reserves have about 510,000 all over the country. So that's just to give you an idea of where we fit in terms of the overall numbers. Now, the 450,000 in the Guard, that's all uniformed people. So the vast majority of that are the 1 week in a month, 2 weeks of the year. I laugh about that because everybody says, yeah, right. I wish it was just that, right? We ask a lot more of our people, but that's their minimum commitment. So on the next slide, this is about the Wyoming National Guard in particular. And again, depending on how you count, we have 3,100 total employees of various types. This is what makes my job fascinating, because in terms of labor law, employment law, I got really 7 categories because I left off different types of contracts because we're not going to talk about those here. So you can see in the upper left-hand little circle, 2347 is the overall number of drill status guardsmen. This is the 1 weekend a month types, part-time. They're only in uniform when they're on duty. Then in the bottom left, you have the active guard reserve, full-timers, always wearing the uniform, full military benefits, just like active duty, except you never leave Wyoming. That's what I am for the last 17 years. upper right, you have dual status technicians. Now, dual status is under Title 32, and it's only in the National Guard. It's called dual status because you have to be a drill status guardsman to have your federal technician employment. If you lose, for whatever reason, your military affiliation, you lose your federal employment. But these are federal civil servants who wear the uniform every day, even though they're not on duty. So when you look at a dual status technician, you won't know how they're being paid. They could be a federal civilian employee or they could be on orders. And you can see we have about 385 of those. The bottom right, we have something relatively new to the Guard since 2018, really, and that's non-dual status technicians. These are pure civilians. They wear civilian clothes. They come to work every day. They're now under Title V. Title V of the United States Code, civil except for some specialties. And that's only since 2018. Before that, we had dual status technicians who were non-dual status, but we're talking 7 people, and most of them were air traffic controllers. I've now confused you. So, and then we have 231 state employees. These are actual bodies, not what we're authorized, because again, we're only at 90% manning. The numbers would be different. These are actual employees, so to speak. So, non-dual status technicians and state employees wear civilian clothes every day. The other 3 categories are in uniform. So if you come to the Guard, you'll see people in uniform. They're one of those 3 statuses. Questions about this?
Okay, the drill status people are, what benefits do they have?
Mr. Chairman, and I think I have a brief benefits chart. I may not. I may have taken it out because it got too complicated. While, like we talked about with Representative Blake a few minutes ago, while they're in a duty status, and even when they're traveling to or from duty, they are covered under the military healthcare system. So if they get hurt driving to drill on a Saturday morning or a Friday night, and they haven't stopped somewhere strange or taken a detour, as we call it, and they get in a car accident, they're covered even if their actual orders don't start until the Saturday morning. While they're at drill, they're covered. While they're at training, they're covered. While they're sitting home on a Tuesday, they're not covered. So benefits matter depending on what status they're in. So if they're sitting at, they can buy into TRICARE. There's a TRICARE Reserve Select. There's a healthcare system that Guard members, it's an absolute benefit these days for drill status guardsmen. And that covers them 24/7. It's a type of private insurance, essentially, that they qualify for as Guard members, and it's extremely cheap compared to what you can get on the economy.
Okay.
Other questions?
Mr. Chairman, and then another benefit, of course, is retirement, and the retirement system is based on points, and it all just depends on the number of points you get during the year. There's different ways to accumulate points. Being on active duty, so many points for being in drill status, and so so retired guardsmen do get a federal retirement if they complete 20 years. However, they don't start that. Is it still 60? They don't start collecting till 60, I think.
So, Mr. Chairman,
At least I didn't.
in reference to Senator Pappas's, so drill status guardsmen do get points for every day or drill period they do. If they serve for 20 years, accumulating a basic number of points, so they've met their obligation, they are entitled to a non-regular retirement, a Guard retirement, which, as Senator Pappas mentioned, at age 60, they start drawing a retirement based on the number of points in their rank. Every point's worth something per rank. AGRs are like active duty members. You serve 20 good years, you serve 20 total years, you can retire and receive retirement immediately. So if you come in at 18, at age 38, after 20 years of service, you can retire and start collecting a retirement check. If you serve 20 years, it's 50% of your base pay. It's 2.5% per year for every year after 20 that you serve, in addition to the 50%. So if you serve 30 years, you get 75%, and that's the cap of your base pay. Now, active duty and AGRs have a couple of other entitlements, so it's not like you get half your pay. You get half your base pay, you don't get basic allowance for for housing, and you don't get basic allowance for subsistence. See, I can immediately go way too deep, perhaps. Technicians, retirement-wise, if they serve at least 20 years into their 50s, it depends on the year they were born, usually 57, sometimes as low as 55, they get a federal civil service retirement, and at age 60, they would get a normal drill status guardsman retirement, so they get 2 checks. Moving on. Everybody's eyes glaze over. Okay. So we showed the bubbles of the different statuses, and so this is just a little chart to talk about, again, really the difference between them all, and I think we've touched on all that. We have drill status guardsmen, also called DSGs, M-Day, traditional guardsmen. All of those are talking about the same thing. Only in uniform, only on duty when they're on orders for training or operations. The rest of the time, they're pure civilians like all of you. Active Guard Reserve, just like in uniform, same pay and benefits. Dual status technicians, also called mil-techs or technicians. Again, they're full-time federal civil servants. They wear a uniform. They have to be DSG members as well. And then the non-dual status technicians, also referred to as Title Vs, are full-time civilian employees not in uniform, but they could also be DSGs. So they could also be guardsmen. They're just not required to be. We'll go to the next slide. All right, you've probably seen this slide before. The green stars are Wyoming Army Guard installations. The yellow star down in Cheyenne is really the state headquarters as well as the Air Guard. You can see the gold stars, or yellow, depending on your printout. These are actually the reserve centers. So down in Cheyenne, there is a Navy Reserve component on F.E. Warren. In Casper, there is an Army Reserve unit, and there's also one I believe, just outside Sheridan. They are extremely small. I want to say the Sheridan Army Reserves is 14 people and like 3 vehicles. I can't even tell you what they do. I forgot to ask. So that's where your military locations are around the state. Any questions on that? Trying to stay good on the time. Okay, so on this, I gave you a handout. Looks like this, with the idea that you could stick this somewhere and refer to it. The first 3 pages are a lot of these acronyms and a little bit of explanation. It talks about things like what is a CST, a civil support team. I've heard about HIMARS and MLRS. That's in there. Those are rocket systems for the Army. And then on the 4th page, you can see typical Army and Air organizational units. I realize we talk about squads, companies, regiments, and you have probably, unless you have military experience, may not know what that means. And then on the air side, we have squadrons, groups, wings, and such. So I just wanted to give you an idea of the size of those units, because we don't talk about that very much. So this was something for you to carry with you or read through and just commit it to memory, right? If you have any terms I've missed, I'll be glad to add them or properly define them for you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Senator Anderson. Go ahead.
I think I'm on. I noticed UH is for a utility helicopter. Is there a different designation for an attack helicopter or some other kind of helicopter?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Anderson, AH. So a Cobra is an AH, attack helicopter.
I've studied my list, Colonel, and AH isn't on here.
No, I did not put it on there. We don't have those in Wyoming, sorry. We don't talk about that very much. I will add it just for you, Senator. I also didn't talk about one of the questions I often get, and it's kind of sort of a joke in the Air Force. Tankers, so cargo planes are Cs, so our C-130s are C-130. Tankers are KC units. And everybody always asks me, it's a tanker, why is it a K and not a T? And there's a twofold answer. One is T represents trainers, which have been around a lot longer than tankers. So they're also cargo planes because they typically also can carry cargo as well as fuel. The K is steeped in deep Air Force mystery. Some people think it refers to kerosene, which way back, fuel was basically kerosene. So K for kerosene. But if you hear of KC-46s, which is the new tanker being just starting to be based, or KC-135s or KC-10s, those are all tankers, even though they start with a K. Now, my Army brethren, needless to say, give me a lot of grief for K, because obviously K in the Air Force is tanker, right? Because we don't know how to spell, apparently.
Okay. Senator Hutchings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank Senator Von Flaten for allowing me to talk to the Colonel and General Porter to prepare this briefing. I think it was a really good briefing. I think you did a very good job. I would like to ask if you could provide this to each member digitally. Again, you just did a really good job, and I hope the members appreciated it, and I hope it helps them understand you guys better when you speak to us. So thank you very much, both of you.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hutchings, I appreciate those kind words, and we will certainly make it available electronically to you all so you can stick it on your desktop or somewhere.
Representative Blake.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On this, Colonel Smith, on this one slide, total number in uniform nationwide. In your career, how has that changed? If you don't mind.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Blake, I've been in since 92, and obviously that was in the midst of Desert Storm drawdown. Desert Storm, the total number of military members definitely ramped up before Desert Storm in the early 90s. After every major war, you can actually Google it and look at DoD military size over the years. You can see after every major war, there's a major cut. So certainly for this generation, after Korea and Vietnam, after Korea, the military was decimated. After Vietnam, it wasn't a lot better. It dropped precipitously. And then there was a slight ramp up during the Reagan years. And then certainly for the early 90s, we were bigger than we are now in the 90s. The leadership, the Joint Chief of Staff leadership has been very clear that they very much, we talk about lethality now, the last couple of years, they very much want uniform members to be more of the sharp end of the stick rather than the support function. So we have started moving more towards civilians, for pure civilians, for a lot of our logistical support. Lawyers. We have lawyers, always will have lawyers in the uniform to go on a deployment, but certainly when you consider when you deploy, you don't usually shut down the base or post you come from. So you always have a baseline level of support to run the training and operations of the people who don't deploy. So the current methodology is we will continue to get a little bit smaller uniformed wise, but the DoD as a whole may actually get bigger total employee wise.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Senator Pappas.
Certainly for the 24 years I was in, I really saw a big drop, especially in the Army Guard, and probably Colonel Shepard over there could tell us about that. But if I recall, we were at 3,200 or over 3,000 in Wyoming, but we lost some missions, I believe, and we really downsized, and we're down to 1,300 now in the
1540-ish.
Okay, in the Army Guard. So it's about half. But also in the air side, we had some active duty folks. We had an association at one time at the base in Cheyenne, and we had active duty folks stationed with us flying C-130s, and that program also went away. So we lost those folks as well.
So, Colonel, it's more or less a money deal, more so than, so the jobs actually wouldn't be available after each major conflict then.
Mr. Chairman, essentially missions go away. if you read historically, brigade combat teams on the Army side, in particular ground forces, there's always been a running dialogue in the 20-something years I've been in that how many do you really need? You know, do you plan for a two-front war? Do you just a near-peer war for one of our three near peers that we consider, I think, North Korea, China, and Russia? It's always a guessing game, and it's always, as you know, nationally, it's always about money, because every uniform member you have has a long benefit tail to it.
Okay, move on.
And with that, sir, I am done, pending your questions, and certainly I'll be around the rest of the morning. At this point, I'd like to call up Mr. Tim Shepard, who's our new Executive Director of the Veterans Administration. I might stay here to flip slides for him,
Okay.
but we're going to talk about the Veterans Facility. I don't know, Mr. Chairman, if I forgot about public comment. So.
Yeah. Is there any public comment on the military updates then? Come on up, Mr. Shepard, and introduce yourself.
There you go.
You ready?
I'm ready, sir.
Go ahead and.
All right, thank you very much. Again, I'm Tim Shepard, and I am the Executive Director for the Wyoming Veterans Commission. And I also have with me Mr. Ryan Scranton, who is a member of the team for the skilled nursing facility. And I don't know if Franz is on the phone. Do we have anyone on the phone?
Yes, sir. This is Franz, the Department of Health.
Okay, great. So we've got the key players for the team assembled. As you'll see, monitoring the progress of the Veterans Facility design and planning. First, I'd just like to give you my perspective as someone coming in from the outside into this project, and someone who has spent 40 years in the Army and the Army Guard, worked a lot at the organizational level. That I'm very impressed with where this team is and how well functioning this team is, and the interagency process that we've brought together to make this skilled nursing facility a reality. I think that, and that includes the architects who are involved with the project as well. I did have the pleasure on the 26th of September to sit through a review of the project with the architects. They were very open to the questions and comments that were raised about the facility. I'd also like to thank committee member Jack Tarter from the Veterans Commission, Commissioner Tarter. He had some great insights into that project and was a part of that conversation on the 26th. And I think that the bottom line for your committee, the project is on track. Things are progressing well, and at this point, we really don't see any showstoppers.
Any questions, committee? And I guess I'd like to thank Mr. Tarter also, because he's been at this a lot longer than probably all of us to try to get the facility on the ground. So thank you, Jack.
Sir, are there any questions?
No, go ahead and proceed. We're a quiet bunch.
Great. Okay, this is the timeline, and again, you won't see where there are any showstoppers there, but what you will see is highlighted in yellow in December is the notification of funds offer. That's critical to the project. But again, we think that's on track and have no reason to expect that we won't receive that and that we'll be able to continue on with the project. Sir, I was remiss. I should introduce the chairman for the Wyoming Veterans Commission. Travis Detai is with us this morning in the audience. So Mr. Detai is here.
Welcome. Okay, go ahead. Proceed.
Great, and there's a view of the layout. You'll see 4 facilities on there, where actually in the initial plans, it would be the 3 facilities starting from left to right, with the 4th as an additional facility or cottage.
Mr. Shepherd, so is this the layout according to the home, the sailor, whatever we call the home in Buffalo? Is that what this layout is?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And it has a future, Mr. Shepherd, it has a future college in it? What is, or a future cottage? I'm sorry, I misspelled that.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, Ryan Scranton, Project Manager, State Construction Department. What you guys are looking at right here, the 4 yellow or gold figures are the skilled nursing cottages. The 3 southernmost will be the built cottages. The northernmost is the showing the future capability for expansion. We did meet out there on the site with you guys and looked at a site north of the existing vet's home as a potential location for the cottages. So you may be wondering what you're looking at here, and working with the director of the vet's home and the design team, that wasn't the best location for the cottages, primarily due to staffing and to the new cottages, and so we've arrived here, new site layout.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Just a question, just to clarify my mind. So, in the initial build, they're going to build 3 cottages. In the initial build, and then that future cottage is for some other time. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Pappas, yes, that's correct.
Okay, and may I continue? The first 2 shown there to the south are non-secure cottages. The third one is a secure cottage. Can you explain the difference? Are the residents restrained in some way?
Yes, the difference between a secured cottage and the interior construction, to try to say it in a gentle, politically correct term, it's high risk clients that may be at risk to themselves or to others. So you'll see anti-ligature devices and fixtures as to not cause harm to themselves or others. They are not physically restrained.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, I didn't meant physical restraint. I meant like similar to Alzheimer's units where, the doors are secured so that they don't leave for their own safety, things like that. I'm assuming there may be actually Alzheimer's type patients that will be housed here. So I guess that's what I'm looking to find out.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Pappas, yes, that's correct. In a standard greenhouse or community living model, the doors are secured. The exterior doors to the facility are secured and alarmed. They don't get to come and go as they please. There are wireless systems to notify the caregivers of any type of movement.
Okay. As I recall, we've had this conversation before, so it isn't that terribly sensitive. We know that there are some of the people we take care of that tend to be violent. I think they ended up in the state hospital most of the time, which wasn't a good option, and this is certainly a much better one. And as I'm looking at this, doesn't this kind of fall? Is it going to be downhill from everything, or are you going to build it up and have it at the similar level?
Mr. Chairman, the site layout that you're looking at right there, it is fairly level. That southernmost cottage is in a nice green lawn. Everything to the south and east of what you're looking at drops off, but the site right there is pretty level ground.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
Does this wipe out their little greenhouse that they just started up again, or is it still there? Do I see it?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Pappas, no, it does not. Okay. It doesn't have to. I think that when we visited up there, the gal that gave us a tour,
I see it.
That was something they really liked, and we're gonna
I see it now on the map, number 25, I think, or whatever. Okay, thank you.
Senator Hutchins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Forgive me, I didn't get your name, but I'm just going to ask the guy in the gray suit this question. The layout is so totally different when we were there, and you looked at, if I can recall, and I'm thinking this is west up. Am I correct on this map? West up?
Yeah.
This is north up.
North is up? Okay, because it looks to me, I thought we came in from the west, but then we were winding, so forgive me. So north is up. It just looks as if I can recall, the area where you've now placed the cottages, they were kind of down in a field that wasn't really attractive. And before, off to the other side, opposite side, it was a beautiful view. So when you say, well, we decided that this isn't really the place, can you give us an idea why you made that change?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hutchins, I'm going to attempt to give the best answer, and if Franz has some more comments, I will invite those. But yes, the views to the east are not. We didn't make this lightly. Really driven by staffing and personnel at home.
Yeah, Senator, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Follow up. I agree with you. Buffalo is beautiful all around. They're going to get an eastern sun in the morning. Changing the cottages, does that kind of, it kind of looks to me as if you can save a lot of those buildings. You won't have to raise any of them. You can just add on and keep the beautiful surroundings that you had before. Was that part of the thought process as well?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hutchins, construction of the skilled cottages would have. I don't know that was a consideration. We are conducting the level vet's home to look at those structures there. It's to be done with those structures.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, Senator Pappas, go ahead.
Just to chime in on that, I think personally this layout works better as well. I really like the idea that south and west sun hitting those buildings on those private porches behind the structure, And I think that's where your best views are over there, is to the south and to the west. And the topography drops off to the south here. So this area works well for construction of the facility. So I think it's a good siting layout.
That was part of my question. I just remembered it really dropping off hard there, and I wondered but it is level. That's good. Right. And the other thing, if you were going to build it at this area that you talked to us about, even a more permanent fixture were the shelter belts that as far as I could see, we're going to have to pull the trees out completely to build it on that side, which I think it's probably a major part of the snow catch to allow employees and people to get access to the property easily. Any other questions then? Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, Tom. Go ahead. Representative Crank.
Is that on? If I may, has anybody, where are we budget-wise? Do you have a feel for that?
Mr. Chairman, where we are with the budget right now, not received the updated architect's budget with their 35% design submittal. We should receive that within a week or two. But they're positive, they're comfortably positive that it is below the last estimate that we got.
Okay. Thank you. Is there more?
Committee, this is just a floor plan layout, and what this shows, you've put the client rooms on one side to maximize the view sheds, with all the support facilities that would be on the front side of the cottages, support being the kitchen, dining room, restroom, spa, mechanical storage areas.
Okay, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question, please? Okay. I noticed that outside of the one office down in the lower left-hand corner, there is no other staff, certainly not a nurse's station, or how are they going to operate the facility if it's a skilled nursing facility without space for nurses to operate out of?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, going back to design and intent for the community living model is really not to have a space for staff to congregate. We would like to provide them an area. Really, the intent is to be interactive with the clients. They're going to be in the kitchen. So they're going to be out on the floor. The office, may have a couch, a desk, but there's not going to be a large place to kind of be. As far as medical equipment, again, this is supposed to feel kind of homey, so you're not going to see the medical equipment out on the floor so much.
Mr. Chairman, follow up.
Senator, go ahead.
Yeah, I understand the greenhouse concept, but certainly normally there's places, or at least a room. It doesn't have to be a place for nurses to congregate. I'm not looking for that. I'm looking for a place for them to, provide medications, a small room for nurses to work out of, unless they're working out of the kitchen, but for that kind of facility. But I would imagine that typically there's a small med room or some kind of a room for them to work out of. I don't really see that. And then a second question I had, and I'm going to go up to the map and ask this question. My question is, why is the unit divided at that point and not open all the way, unless it's for fire reasons, and that's a firewall, or is that a more secure side, that left side?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Pappas, that's a very good question. And the floor plan that you guys are looking at right now, this is the floor plan of the secured cottage.
Okay.
And those doors are by the entire facility built the higher level of security. But if we don't have 12 clients that need that care, it's really to be able to have 6 beds and have the other 6 be not secure.
I got a question.
Okay, yes. Mr. Chairman, go ahead.
Mr. Scranton, so am I under the understanding that these bedrooms will face the south and east? Is that the correct?
Mr. Chairman, that's
line?
correct.
Okay. So the mountains, follow up on that, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
The follow up, but the mountains are to the west, aren't they?
Mountains are primarily to the west, yes.
Okay.
Good committee? Okay. So,
Committee, if I may also, I'd like to share a report. Per the bill, state construction was to report to the committee on exercising of the loan authority.
Yep.
And as of 4 September, we have exercised that loan authority, working with the state auditor's office, the state treasurer's office, members of Department of Health, state construction. That's trudged through that and got it done, and we are ready to move forward.
okay. Yes. Representative Blake, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On your timeline, is this very optimistic, kind of optimistic, or do you think how this should go if there are not any snags?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Blake, this is the timeline, the best that we know it. So really, as it's presented, we should know whether the funds will be granted December 20, January 2020, December 19, excuse me. We have every indication that we will be granted the funds. That does not change the design timeline. We will still be done with design mid-March of 2020. That does not change the VA grant after 2020. After those dates, we have a few other requirements, being the MOA, the final requirement. Once that is signed, that's when the money flows. State construction will then put the project, well, excuse me. Yeah, I'm sorry. We will put the project out for bid at that point. We have, as a requirement of the grant, we have 90 days.
Follow-up, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brief follow-up. So we should know by the time we're in session whether everything, the notification of funds offer is done, and will there be anything else that the legislature is going to have to do, or are we all squared up on what we have to do?
Chairman, Representative Blake. Will be granted later in the year. To answer the second half of your question, I do not believe there are any further actions that the legislature has to make at that point. Or
It's hard for the lawyer to stay still. Mr. Chairman, to follow up with Representative Blake, when the bill was passed, the intent was to do all in one. So unless we go in for a second grant or an expansion or a relocation of a second facility, everything from the legislator point of view should be done. It was a comprehensive bill for that purpose, and you may recall there was just a lot in there that it was a big bill. The other thing I was just going to mention is the final VA grant application, as I understand it, having talked through some of this grant process, will be done 30 June. We'll know before then, as Mr. Scranton said during the session, we should know if the funds are going to be made available. When we actually get the funds, we're talking about the federal government. That's the squishiest part of this timeline. We can be approved, we can have the completed application in, we can have the MOA signed 1 August 20. The funds should be available before the end of the federal fiscal year on 30 September. That's about as good as we get.
Okay. Well, while we're on that, I believe in part, Stan, when we discussed this last time, if there is any kind of legislative changes or whatnot, it hampers the progress of this timeline probably significantly. So anyway, the all-in-one bill is as it was, probably the way it should stay, according to the past director and probably the new director as well, I would guess. Senator Anderson, did you have something you wanted to ask?
Our table was really confused on this latest rendition. We're not architects. We don't have to played architects on TV. But we've got a main floor plan that says north is right straight up. But I think you're saying those rooms are to the east, which would mean north would be about 90 degrees off, I believe. I think I'm looking at number 3, and it's the secure cottage, which those rooms face the east. Then north is not straight up on this map.
in this drawing, and
this product will face the other map, slightly
southeast.
Okay. All right. Any other questions then? Yes, Senator Hutchins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't mean to belabor the point, but, we started out with one way in our minds. We went out and viewed the land and saw what was what. I know it would be a bad thing to try to change things at this stage, but it may be a good thing because you've changed things. Just a suggestion, would it be possible to flip the interior so the bedrooms would face the opposite way instead of east? All the action is inside, and it just seems to me, I don't know, if I'm an old lady, I'd like to see action instead of just a big field. I don't know, but could that be something that we can consider? Because it looks like all the offices, the kitchen is facing the inside of the grounds. And I think one of the main reasons for choosing Buffalo was, again, the mountains. So just a thought. I see you have the buildings in the curvature of the land, but I don't know, maybe get some of the veterans' inputs and see, hey, how would you like to be over there looking out versus in? Just a suggestion.
Chairman, Senator Hutchings, absolutely, we can consider that. We'll look at that.
Yeah, I guess we got a representative. Go ahead, Representative Obermuller.
Yeah, a little pushback. Question about what it's like to have a sunny side. In Buffalo, the nice place to sit out on the patio is on the east side. Otherwise, there's too much heat on the mountainside. So in the evening, you wouldn't be able to use those patios. It's substantial covering over those. So the idea of flipping those not sound good to me. Thank you.
Go ahead, Representative.
Perhaps the good chairman from County 16 would like to weigh in on what the best view in is of the Veterans Facility.
Not sure who you're referring to.
Johnson County Commissioner.
Ah. Oh, hello, Bill. Yeah, I should. Did you have any comments on this while we're here? We'll be there shortly, but anyway, if you do, this will be the time when you'll be doing it. I think we're about done, aren't we?
So we have one more slide on cataloging, but this is it for skilled nursing, sir.
Something to go back on. Probably most of us have a little bit of experience with family members that eventually ended up in skilled care. And with the family members that I can think of, it was a very, very short time. And the struggle the struggle at that late part of your life, I don't know if it's going to matter to them where they have to go to get the best view. And I think at this point, and the other part is, I'm not sure the view of the mountain would be very good unless you remove the trees. And those have to go away, otherwise they can't see the mountain anyhow. This one here looks to me like a good site because it's so clear. You can see the whole city, the whole valley, the mountain on the other side. And that means on east or west side, I think. I'm not sure that'll make too much difference. The quality of care will. Striving for. Any other things? You've got another slide.
On the cataloging of the military.
Let's have public comment on the facility. We'll go down a little ways and come on up, Commissioner.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Botany, Johnson County Commissioner. City of Buffalo and Johnson County have been active members in this design process, and I just want to reassure the committee that this site along the drive of that curvature is really quite a good choice for that. It is level ground. Two of the cottages are going to have views of Clear Creek, and that farthest cottage, which I do not believe it's a secure cottage, will have an opportunity for some views of the Bighorn. So I think this design team that is working very hard to keep this project on time and on schedule has selected a very, very good location that allows integration with the existing facility for those residents that are in the domiciliary to be able to go over and visit, and if you are able to leave those cottages and go over and participate in activities at the main facility. So I do think this is a good design choice, and we're just very pleased with the work that has been done. This is a Class A team that we've been working with, and on behalf of the city and the county, we appreciate being involved in this process and making sure that the integrity of that facility is maintained.
Okay, committee,
Mr. Chairman.
any questions? Go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. Previously, we've talked about this, and I think you gave us an answer, but can you tell us about the water line, what's happening with the water line? And also, we're about 2 years away from staffing and needing a lot of staffing. How are we doing on that?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Anderson, the water line remains an ongoing discussion. A flow test was going to be necessary to determine what capacity, and what's interesting about this is that the state of Wyoming actually owns the water line that goes into the veterans home. When that water line was put in, the veterans home was not an annexed portion of the city of Buffalo. So per the water connectors agreement, they built and own that line. The engineers are looking at the capacity. In an email this morning from Craig Shavlik with KLNA, who is working on that, there needs to be a few more final design pieces on these cottages so they can figure out what they need in terms of water suppression and other things so that final determination can be made. But we are monitoring it very closely and are committed to making sure that the resources there, once they can tell us exactly what capacity is needed. The second part of the question, we are very pleased to be now in our third offering of our CNA program that is in partnership with Sheridan College. We are also debuting our CNA program at Buffalo High School. They will begin in January. This is a 0-hour class, so it's not going to prohibit any of those students from pursuing the Hathaway Challenge curriculum. They will be working in partnership with Johnson County Healthcare Center and Sheridan College, so we continue to add slots to train those CNAs. The bariatric testing facility that Johnson County paid for at Sheridan College in our campus in Buffalo, allowing regional testing of CNAs is up and running, and they have been administering tests. Honestly, at this point, the biggest and I'm sure you're probably hearing it in your community from your medical facilities. At this point, the biggest barrier in nursing and CNAs right now is a backlog at the state of Wyoming in terms of their licensure between 3 and 6 weeks. This is a point that I've raised with the governor, and he assures me that they're looking into it. But you should all be aware that there is a little bit of a lag in when you've got those nurses hired, if they need licensure, that the paperwork is not moving as quickly as it should have at the state.
Any other questions? Thank you, Commissioner. Is there any other public comment? So, Director, I think at this point we'll take a break and then we'll pick up on the cataloging.
All right, thank you, sir.
Presentation. Thank you. About 10, 15 minutes.
The slide master.
Gather up again. Director Shepard, I think this would be a good time for you to give a more formal introduction of yourself and tell us a little bit about your history in the military and how you got here.
All right, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I will tell you I am not Steve. I am Tim Shepard, and I will tell you that in October of May of 1977, I enlisted in the United States Army to become a helicopter mechanic. And I was stationed at Fort Campbell, Kentucky with the 101st Airborne and served as a helicopter mechanic until I ruined 2 helicopters, and they then made me the company clerk. And I was a very, very good company clerk, and I had a great company commander, and he advised me that I should finish my degree, join the Guard, and go through OCS, and then come back into the active Army. And so I decided the way to do that was to move out to Wyoming and to go to school. And I did join the Wyoming Guard and did go through officer candidate school in Wyoming and served in the Wyoming Army National Guard and the Army for a total of 40 years. I rose to the position of Wyoming Army Guard Chief of Staff, a job that I loved. Spent about 4 years in that and really grew the end strength and revitalized the force structure for the Army Guard under Major General Ed Wright, who was a great mentor and friend. I then became the United States Property and Fiscal Officer, and so when Chris did his presentation, I was very proud of how he represented all the different statuses, because that was something that I was very, very concerned with, and making sure that people were in the right status and we were using equipment as it was appropriately designed and what it was intended for, and that when we did use it on the state side, that we actually reimbursed the federal government. So it was a great job. I loved working very close with General Reiner in helping to make sure that we not only met the requirements of the state, but also used everything as it was intended. So I think that's a little background on who I am. I spent the last, I actually retired in September of 17. And then spent the last couple of years doing a lot of volunteer work. I actually was the governor of the Rocky Mountain District of Kiwanis and worked with 4 or 5 other boards and actually delayed my assignment as the executive director for the Wyoming Veterans Commission so I could kind of figure out how to get all of those things done and take on another full-time job. So that takes us to where we are today.
Okay. So what rank were you when you retired?
I retired as a colonel.
Okay. So if we refer to you as Colonel Shepard, you're okay with that?
I would love that.
Okay. All right. I was trying to figure out colonel or chief, which you'd prefer.
I like chief a lot as well because it was a great job.
Okay. We'll remember that. So I guess continue with your presentation of the cataloging.
Okay, sir, so our cataloging of military and veterans history throughout the state, the last time we came before the committee, we talked a lot about what we cataloged, and so now I would like to turn it over to Mr. Woodward to talk about where we are in that process and where we need to go moving forward with your concurrence.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, my name is John Woodward. I'm the Director of Museums for the Wyoming Military Department. I was tasked with this project by former Executive Director Steve Kravitsky. I was working with contacts in state parks and cultural resources. I was responsible for developing the list that was presented previously. Since the last meeting of the committee, I've been working with contacts in the Wyoming Office of Tourism to develop options for how to utilize that list moving forward. We discussed a number of different options, including a brochure, which was one of the ideas that came from the committee initially, but also things like tour itineraries for third-party groups, the ability to add the items to any kind of web-based map or information system. Those brainstorming sessions really boil down to the development of a brochure and the development of some itineraries that could be distributed through the Wyoming Office of Tourism. The directives that were given to me from the beginning is that I would be assist with the development of the material, whether that's first the list, later some of the content for any kind of printed material, but then turn the project over to the Office of Tourism as they are better equipped and better positioned to be able to market those military and veterans related sites to interested parties. So where we are today is I'm continuing to work with the Department of Tourism to create a brochure that we can have ready for the 2020 tourist season. So work on that over the next several months, take that from design into a publication phase, and be able to have those materials out once the snow clears and we are ready to welcome a new set of visitors to this great state.
Okay, committee questions. Senator Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In your research, did you find that the Wyoming Air Guard actually had a detachment here in Casper in the 60s?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Anderson, yes, sir. The detachment was, the Department of Defense actually signed an agreement with the Airport Board in 1953 to lease a good portion of the airport for National Guard training use. That continued until about 1960. However, there was still a National Guard detachment in sort of a rump form until 1968, according to our research.
Okay. Representative Laux.
Mr. Chairman, so I guess I'll ask this in the form of a question, but I actually trying to share some information that I'm not sure if it's known about. But did you know the very first Vietnam memorial in the world is in Casper, Wyoming?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Laux, no, I did not know that, but that is good information.
May I expand?
Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman. So there's a park here in town called Freedom Park, and it was dedicated before the war ended, actually. And a man named Leo Sanchez, and many of us know here in the room, was a mentor of mine, and I'm very proud of what we did. There was so it's right. It's on Cherry Street. Anyway, I can show it to you. We planted. I was head of it on the youth side of it, and we dedicated that. I want to say I can find the dates on this. I got news clippings and stuff on it, and pictures in the paper on it. But we put 10 blue spruce trees there with the markers of all 10 of the Wyoming POWMIs at the time. We put a plaque there with a blue spruce tree that none of the blue spruce trees lived. And we had no funding. We had the city's Parks Department blessing us on it. And in fact, the first playground piece of equipment was the swing set that came out of my mom and dad's backyard. And it was the first memorial in the world for the Vietnam era.
Thank you, Representative. That's good information. I'm sure as you move along with this cataloging, you'll find out tidbits of information like that that you can add to what you've already got and collected. Any other questions? Oh, I'm sorry. I need to about spit on this thing, I'm afraid. Any other questions from the committee? Yeah, go ahead, Representative Blake.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I don't remember how long ago it was, maybe 12 years ago, we toured the little museum down here. I just wonder how it's changed in the past 12 years, 10 years. And then I would also like to know, do you take donations from veterans while it's on display, and then you give them back if they come back? How does that work? Because I know some guys down in Green River have some World War II stuff, Vietnam stuff. They want it on display. Besides the American Legion, there they have a little tiny display case downstairs. I just wondered how that works, how it's changed, and how you do donations.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Blake, as the Veterans Museum here at the airport is one of the museums under my responsibility. It's where my office is located. To give you an idea, over the last 12 years, the museum has changed quite a bit. In 2008, John Goss was hired by the Wyoming Military Department to serve as the facility's first paid administrator. Eric Wimmer was brought on shortly afterwards as a part-time curator. That we transitioned from the museum's original founding under Joy Marshall Kading to what we begin to have as a formalized museum with an established set of policies and procedures. We rotate exhibits on a fairly regular basis. We actually have an exhibit opening scheduled for next month. We try and rotate exhibits, smaller exhibits on an annual basis, larger exhibits sometimes on a 3 to 4 year schedule, depending on staffing and resource availability. To follow up on your further question about collecting artifacts, we do. At the present time, we have a collections moratorium in place till the end of the year. That's because we have a backlog of artifacts that we are trying to catalog and correctly house. Our collection is estimated to be around 50,000 artifacts, and we only have roughly half of those cataloged and properly stored. So beginning in January, ending 31 December, that moratorium will end and we'll begin collecting again. We have some set collecting a narrowed collecting focus because we have limited space available in order to house those artifacts. Unfortunately, we are not able to take, say, a donation that comes in the door on a Tuesday and then the next day be able to put it on exhibit. We simply aren't equipped in terms of the availability of space. Typically, when we are doing exhibits, we have two categories. We have a veterans exhibit, which will focus specifically on an individual veteran, their service experience, and their contributions after they've left the service. And those are, as I said, are pretty much done on an annual basis. Larger exhibits focusing on specific thematic topics. We have an upcoming exhibit on the Casper Army Air Base that will open in December. That's something where we will have a general theme, and then we'll either pull from our collections or solicit loans from third parties, either other museums or individuals, to fill gaps within our narrative focus. If there's something that we would like to borrow from, say, the State Museum, Sheridan County Museum, then we'll reach out to those institutions or a private individual if we know that they have materials. But hopefully, Representative Blake, you'll have a chance to visit the museum this afternoon and get a chance to see what we're doing firsthand.
Representative Joe McGuire.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And could you just tell us briefly, I presume things like Quebec 5 and things like that will be included in the brochure. And as a part of that, the new military vehicles museum that's being put up in Du Bois, will that be part of it, or will that be considered a private and not entered into what would be a tourism type of, brochure that you would put up? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative McGuire, in the initial survey, I did include the Quebec 1 readiness site and the National Museum of Military Vehicles in Du Bois on my survey list. We have not yet taken that list to create a list of items that will be included on a brochure or different things, but I don't see any reason why those would not be included. They do have that military nexus that we're seeking to promote. So at this time, we haven't made a decision, but I don't see any reason why we would rule them out.
Okay. The National Guard Museum in Cheyenne is due for a remodel. Is that in process, or do you know when it's going to happen?
Mr. Chairman, I believe the facility was remodeled 2014, 2015. I believe that project was completed. We did have our status as a statutory museum was established as of July 1st, but as far as I believe that any building projects were completed several years ago.
All right, I'm confused. I thought we did it much more recent than that. Okay.
I can certainly look at that and get back to you, sir.
Fine. That's fine. I'm probably mixed up. Any other questions? All right. Is that it? Go ahead, Colonel.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to add that I am extremely pleased to have this job, this opportunity as the Executive Director of the Wyoming Veterans Commission. I did talk a little bit about what I was doing in retired life. I was very happy in retired life and felt very fulfilled with what I was doing. But one of the things that I think the thing that I enjoyed the most out of my career was to take care of soldiers. And when I saw the opportunity to help veterans, I just couldn't pass it up. And so I applied for the job, and I'm just so happy to have it and have every expectation that that's what I will do in this position, is to look for those opportunities and to make sure that we are doing everything we can to take care of our veterans and to make sure that they get the honors and the benefits that they have so richly earned.
Thank you. So I believe Colonel Smith.
Mr. Chairman, that completes our presentation pending guidance from the committee. I would mention with regard to the cataloging, I think we're at a place where it's going to be up to the Department of Tourism to put it out on the website, do a brochure. So it may be during the session we can get back to you about where we are, but really no legislative action is required. So we're kind of done with the topic. It'll continue to move on pending the committee's desire to get an update at a later date.
Okay. Thank you. Is there any public comment on the cataloging of, yes, come up, Mr. Detai, come on up here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Travis Detai, wearing the hat of Chairman of the Wyoming Veterans Commission before you today, so I'm not going to talk about coal and don't raise our taxes, although I'll get that in. I would just like to say we are very pleased to have Colonel Shepard on board as our new Executive Director. I've known Colonel Shepard for a long time, back from another life when I was working as Senator Craig Thomas's military aide out in Washington, D.C., and we worked on a lot of projects together, and I have the utmost confidence that he's going to do an excellent job. I'd also like to thank and recognize John for his work on this project and also his work at the Veterans Museum. If you haven't gotten out there, please do so. It's an outstanding facility, and he does a great job. Also in the audience is Mr. Darren Brahaney, who runs the Oregon Trail State Veterans Cemetery. Again, if you haven't been out there, Darren and his one-man, two-man crew do the work of 30. And it's a beautiful, beautiful, world-class facility, and he does a great job, and I want to recognize him as well. One of the things, as in my charge as chairman of the commission, what I've tasked the commission with is I believe our number one priority, our very first priority, our core mission is getting those services and those benefits to our veterans across the state of Wyoming. To make that happen, we have a very robust service officer program. We have 8 service officers around the state, and they cover the entire state. And a lot of that is thanks to you for providing those positions. We currently have 7. We'll have the 8th one filled up in the northeast corner of the state, hopefully within the month. But those people spend a lot of windshield time getting out in your communities and servicing those veterans. And if any of you have ever gone through the veterans benefit process, it can be a nightmare. and you need people that know what they're doing to help you get that job done. And so we have got a great team. And just a little bit of information to share with you. To date in the calendar year, our veteran service officers have filed claims for 1,227 veterans, and translated into dollars, that's about $47 million worth of claims that are getting into the pockets of veterans and spent in your communities. So they do a great job. We are happy to take on the tasks that you assign to us for example, the cataloging, but we very much feel that our core mission is getting those services into the hands of our veterans, and we're very proud of that. And on a final note, with regard to the skilled nursing facility, thank you guys very much for your support on that. That's going to be a great project. It's needed. It is a benefit to the veterans of Wyoming that right now they can't take advantage of. And it's filling a great gap. So thank you very much. And with that, Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to be here, and I would stand for any questions.
Committee questions? We must all be hungry. It's about lunch break.
Question, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, now we got
one question. One question. Well, the audience is full, as you can tell. So could you have the director of the Veteran Cemetery stand up? I don't know which one he is.
Yeah.
Oh, there he is. All right. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. We appreciate it. We really appreciate your work.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thought you were going to mention something about firing up a permanent guard station here or something. But
That'd be a good idea.
just, yeah. My guess is that if you did, you'd have more guardsmen in Wyoming. If you spread it out, that would be an advantage to it that I can think of. All right. Are we done? Yeah. Representative Newsom, and then we'll get to you, Senator.
So in your work with the tourism board, are you contributing financially to the creation of that brochure, or is that all on the tourism board budget, having served prior chairmanship of that committee?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Newsom, I don't think that's really been resolved, and I don't want to speak for the Veterans Commission, but that's not really their mandate. And any funds they have would have to really be looked at hard if that's an appropriate use of those funds. Tourism obviously has their own budget, and if they come to this greater body in the February session and ask for money for a brochure, hopefully the committee members can support that. But we're not at that stage yet. They really, just take a minute, had briefly discussed with some folks in tourism many months ago. They never know these days if a brochure does anything. Everybody wants it on their phone. They want it electronically. They want an app. So there may not be a direct publishing cost to be paid. And that's one of the things I know they're relying on the tourism folks to figure out, because it's a different world than when I was growing up as a kid and I always wanted a brochure to take with me home. People don't use those as much. So we'll see what happens.
Okay, Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, in my book, there was a letter from the Wyoming Construction Department, and I was wondering if we're going to talk about that a little bit. He makes reference to $9 million that the state of Wyoming was going to loan the skilled nursing facility, which that makes it sound like the skilled nursing facility is paying that back. I don't know, is that correct, or do we fund that?
Yes, I think, okay, so my understanding, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, this is a loan. It's a $9 million, get on the right figures here, $9 million loan that should more than adequately cover for the cost of this thing. Then it's paid back over time by the stipend we receive from taking care of the veterans. I'm trying to remember what the timeline was. It didn't seem like it was very long, but 15 years, okay.
Mr. Chairman, the grant from the federal government does not have to be repaid, just the loan from the Wyoming state. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. So this comes at no cost to the state of Wyoming. Yeah. Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And since we're ahead just a moment, with your indulgence, I wanted to just talk a little bit about the airport and what we'll see this afternoon during the tour. Would that be appropriate?
Yes. Go ahead.
So anyway, the story of this airport starts December 7th, 1941, with the attack on Pearl Harbor. And at that point, if you were out here, this was just a sagebrush flat. There was nothing, absolutely nothing here. And about a month after that, the members of the Casper City Chamber went to Washington, D.C., and that's kind of an interesting story in itself, because when I talked to my mom and people like that, at that time there was no air service or anything else in D.C. So members of the Chamber went out to Washington, D.C., and they met with the military department, who at that point, I can only imagine how busy they were with Pearl Harbor being attacked and then the Philippines falling. There was a domino effect. People did not know what to expect or what was going on. And they said, what can we do? And at that point they said, well, we in America, we're going to build 12 training bases, and we're going to build them in the interior part of the country. And the reason that we're going to build them in the interior part of the country is they were afraid that our coastal sides were going to be bombed and under attack. So they were building these training bases as far inland as they could possibly do it in order to protect the assets. So they decided to build a base in Casper, Wyoming. In April, they sent a representative out to Casper to start buying land here. In March, they got ready. In April, they actually turned the first spade of dirt. And in 6 months, they had built this entire base, over 350 buildings, 4 miles of runway, all of this asphalt that you see out here. There are 5 big hangars that we'll see during the tour, what we call the legacy hangars. They had their own power generation plant. They had their own sewer system. They had their own water supply. They built an entire city here in 6 months, and they opened it 2 weeks ahead of schedule. And they actually had trainees showing up. There used to be a train spur. They actually had trainees show up, and they didn't have any staff here. They had to go into town and get volunteers to come out and cook for these kids. And, they were people like my dad. They were 17-year-old kids who showed up here and started training. It's just amazing when you think about that. And we'll see some of the barracks are still here. The old base hospital annex is still here, the maintenance facility and everything. And again, that was all built in 6 months. And they started training people. At that time, Casper was about 18,000 people. At any given time, they had about 8,000 people here on the base. So almost, roughly half again as many people that were in Casper were here on the base. So it was a bustling, active area. They had their own WASP pilot. So again, talking about the equality state and things like that, this was an area where, and it was due to the demands at that time, where equality was given to females. We had a detachment of colored members of the military here who were involved in maintenance and everything. So it was really an amazing deal. And then at the end of the war in 1947 to 1949, in that given time frame, the military department deeded this airport to Natrona County. And so from that time forward, it operated as a financially independent portion of the Natrona County government. So what that means, long story short, is that the airport, and I happen to be on the airport board, the airport operates financially as its own entity. And so we have to, between the fuel tax that we collect and other forms of revenue, including, and we're blessed to have such a big facility. You can see the bales of hay. We've got an ag operation. We have our own industrial park. And with those things, we raise enough money that we can operate the airport financially on its own. And this is the only airport in the state of Wyoming that does not subsidize commercial air service. We operate as a free market commercial air service airport, the only one in the state. Even Jackson has to subsidize its air service. So, we're proud of that. Some of the things that you'll see, of course, the old facilities and things. But the other thing that we'd like you to see today is how expensive and how complex it is to operate a commercial airport and to have commercial service. I mean, I don't know if you saw, but they were de-icing airplanes over there. We've got a de-icing pad. You can't just spray de-icing fluid. You have to collect it and keep it. You can see the people that are out brooming and sweeping the runways and things. We have 24-hour crash fire rescue. We've got a federal control tower, which you'll get to go up and see. So all of those things are part and parcel of a commercial air service operation, and it will illustrate, hopefully, how difficult it is for the other cities in the state, Riverton and places like that. If you have a 1 or 2 operation per day, it's kind of a difficult thing because you don't just have all these people show up. I mean, our people today were called in at 2 o'clock in the morning to start clearing the runways. You don't just have people show up, clear the runways, and then go home and you have to, they're full-time employees, so you have to take care of them. So it's a big operation. Some of the other thing that you'll see is the commercial rail spur. That's not ours. You're just going to see the rail spur, and Representative Blake will, be able to help us with that. There's a big difference between the mainline rail and a spur, and so we'll get to hear about that, and you'll be amazed at how much is going on down there between the storage and things like that. And one of the things I thought that Representative Sweeney was going to come out and talk about, but one of the things that we as a state are missing is the storage of industrial products. You'll see that we have a small laydown yard for wind turbine blades and wind turbine parts. There was a bill that didn't pass through the governor's office, which was a tax deferral of laydown. And what that means is when you bring in industrial equipment, unfortunately in the state of Wyoming, it's taxed immediately. And we're losing a huge amount of business because Colorado does not tax it. So if you go down and you fly over Greeley, you'll see there are massive laydown yards full of wind turbine parts that are going to go to Rollins and other places, which didn't come to Casper because they get taxed immediately. And so that's just, whether or not it's right or wrong, I'm just putting out that there are things that we are missing. And the same thing with industrial equipment and other things we're missing because of our tax structure. So that just something that will be of interest, but you'll get to see it. So I see lunch is here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for indulging me, and appreciate it very much.
Well, thank you, sir. That's if at all possible, everybody, if you're missing any of the tours that are set up, you're usually missing really special things. So if you can get there, please do. And with that, we'll adjourn for the day and have lunch. Oh, yes. Tomorrow morning we start earlier at 8:30, so don't plan on sleeping in at all. We are adjourned for the day.